Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Language Lounge with Jack, where we dive deep into the world of language learning, exploring tips, tricks, and strategies to help you master a new language. I'm your host, Jack, and today we've got a fantastic episode lined up for you. If you're looking to improve your English listening skills, especially using podcasts and audiobooks, you're in for a treat. Joining us today is Emma, an experienced language coach who has helped countless students enhance their listening abilities. Emma, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jack. I'm excited to be here and talk about one of my favorite topics.
The pleasure is all mine. So Emma, let's jump right in. We hear a lot about how important listening is when learning a new language, but why do you think listening is such a crucial skill, especially for English learners?
Great question, Jack. Listening is foundational because it's how we naturally acquire language in the first place. Think about how babies learn to speak. They spend months just listening before they ever utter a word. For English learners, or learners of any language, listening helps you internalize the rhythm, intonation, and natural flow of the language. It also exposes you to new vocabulary and phrases in context, which is much more effective than just memorizing words on their own.
That makes a lot of sense. So when it comes to improving listening skills, I know a lot of people gravitate towards podcasts and audiobooks. What makes these tools particularly effective for language learners?
Podcasts and audiobooks are fantastic resources because they offer exposure to authentic language used in a wide range of contexts. Unlike scripted dialogues you might find in a textbook, podcasts often feature natural, unscripted conversations, which can include slang, idioms, and various accents. This variety helps learners become more adaptable and better equipped to understand English in real-world situations. Audiobooks, on the other hand, are great for deepening your understanding of language structure. Because audiobooks are typically read at a more measured pace, they allow listeners to focus on pronunciation and intonation while following along with the text, if they choose. This dual engagement, listening and reading, can significantly boost comprehension and retention.
Absolutely. I've always found that listening to the natural flow of conversation in podcasts really helps with picking up on nuances that you wouldn't get from a textbook. But I know a lot of learners can feel overwhelmed by native-level content. Do you have any tips for beginners or those who might struggle to keep up?
Yes, that's a common concern. For beginners or even intermediate learners, it's important to choose content that is just challenging enough. If the podcast or audiobook is too difficult, it can be frustrating and demotivating. I always recommend starting with content that matches your current level and gradually increasing the difficulty. For example, there are podcasts specifically designed for English learners, which often feature slower speech and simpler language. As your skills improve, you can start exploring podcasts on topics that interest you, even if they're not designed for learners. Another tip is to make use of transcripts. Many podcasts and audiobooks offer transcripts, which you can read alongside or after listening. This can help you catch any words or phrases you might have missed and reinforce what you've heard.
That's solid advice. The idea of using transcripts is particularly useful. I've noticed it helps learners bridge the gap between what they hear and what they understand. Speaking of which, do you think it's better to listen actively or passively when trying to improve listening skills?
Both active and passive listening have their place in language learning. Active listening is when you're fully focused on the audio, maybe taking notes or pausing to look up unfamiliar words. This is great for when you're studying and really want to absorb the material. Passive listening, on the other hand, is when you're playing the audio in the background while doing other tasks, like cooking or commuting. While you might not catch every word, this type of listening helps immerse you in the language and improves your ability to recognize patterns and sounds subconsciously. I usually recommend a mix of both. Active listening sessions can be more intensive and targeted, while passive listening can help you get used to the language in a more relaxed way.
That's a good point. The balance between active and passive listening can keep the learning process both effective and enjoyable. Now let's talk about consistency. How often should someone listen to podcasts or audiobooks if they really want to see improvement?
Consistency is key in language learning. Ideally, you should try to incorporate listening into your daily routine. Even just 15 to 30 minutes a day can make a big difference over time. The key is to make it a habit. For those who are really serious about improving, I'd recommend aiming for a mix of longer sessions, like listening to an entire podcast episode or a chapter of an audiobook, and shorter bursts, like listening to a few minutes of content while having your morning coffee. Also, try to diversify the content. Listen to different genres, accents, and topics. This variety keeps things interesting and exposes you to different aspects of the language.
Absolutely, I can imagine that variety also helps keep you engaged and prevents burnout. Speaking of which, do you have any favorite podcasts or audiobooks that you recommend to your students?
Oh, there are so many great ones out there. For English learners, I often recommend starting with The English We Speak by the BBC, which is a short podcast focusing on idiomatic expressions. It's perfect for picking up useful phrases in a fun and engaging way. For audiobooks, anything by Agatha Christie is usually a hit. Her books are great because the language is clear, the stories are captivating, and they often come with excellent narrators who enunciate well, making it easier to follow along. If you're looking for something more challenging, TED Talks Daily is another great podcast. The talks cover a wide range of topics, and the speakers often have different accents, which is excellent practice for real-world listening.
Those are excellent recommendations, Emma. I love that you mentioned TED Talks. They're such a treasure trove of content and really push you to understand complex ideas in English. Before we wrap up, do you have any final tips or advice for our listeners who are eager to improve their English listening skills?
My biggest piece of advice is to be patient with yourself. Improving listening skills takes time, and it's normal to feel frustrated at times. The key is to keep going and to enjoy the process. Don't be afraid to listen to the same content multiple times. It's actually a great way to deepen your understanding. Also, remember to celebrate small victories. Whether it's understanding a tricky sentence or recognizing a new word, those small wins add up and will keep you motivated.
That's wonderful advice, Emma. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. I'm sure our listeners will find your tips incredibly helpful.
Thank you, Jack. It was a pleasure being here and chatting with you. I hope everyone feels inspired to start listening more and enjoying the journey of learning English.
I'm sure they will. And to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Language Lounge with Jack. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends. Until next time, keep listening, keep learning, and have fun with it. Take care, everyone.